Welcome to Financial Fridays. This is Winfred Burns II, and I'm inviting you to come in, take a seat for a minute, grab a piece of paper if you don't have one, or whatever you take notes on, because we're going to talk for a few minutes. This is Financial Fridays, and as you see by the topic, we're talking about relationships and money. Relationships and money. I know that's a topic that we don't typically like to talk about, and it's definitely a topic we typically don't like to talk about in the open. But we know from data that in marriages, that money problems is the biggest reason for divorce, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. And so we've got to talk about it. We've got to have some serious discussion about it, not so we can begin to turn this tide, so we can begin to communicate better, to love better one another in the area of finances. I understand why this is such a difficult topic to have, because there's so much emotion that's tied to our money. I mean, let's be honest, most of us spend at least 40 hours a week at work, plus the time preparing for work, plus the time in your commute getting to and from work. So often, close to 60% of our week can be spent doing things surrounded around work. And when we spend that much time doing something, the result we get from it, which is the paycheck, we want to make sure it's secure, that it is used in a way that we see that's beneficial. So I can totally understand why this is such a difficult topic, but also why it's such a topic that needs to be discussed. Before I move into the rest of this discussion, do me a favor, if you have not already, please hit the share button and make sure you say hello. What's going on, Chris? How you doing today? So again, we've got a great topic here. We're talking about relationships and money. So as you come in, of course, do me a favor, hit the share button. Lisa, how you doing? Will, how you doing? So if you don't know, this is Financial Literacy Month. So this goes right along with Financial Literacy Month. So I won't keep you. I'm gonna jump right into it so we can get on with our day. So again, we are talking about relationships and money. Juanita, how you doing? Deneen, how you doing? Again, guys, hit that share button. Deborah, how are you today? Y'all hit that share button as you come in, or if you know that there's somebody who needs this information, please go ahead and tag them. So again, this is Financial Literacy Month, so relationships and money go hand in hand. So how do you, Winfred, have the conversation about money in relationships? First, let me say that this conversation is not just for people who are married. Even if you are in a serious relationship, this is a discussion that is definitely worth having. Why? Because you don't want to get too late down the path of marriage before you are on the same page about money. Because as I said previously, financial issues are still the number one reason in this country why people get divorced. And so you want to make sure that you and the person who you enter into marriage with are, as the Bible says, equally yoked, or at least on the same page about your money. And anytime I teach this, I tell you that in most marriages, in the 18 years that I have been coaching people in the financial services arena, in most marriages and in most relationships, one person is a spender and one person is a saver. That does not mean that that you as a couple are not equally yoked if you are both not a spender or both not a saver. I actually believe, hey Nicole, hey Shamir, how you doing? Guys, make sure you hit that share button. Hey Halima, again, I would suggest that it is often God's plan, as Drake would say, to have one person who is a spender join with one person who is a saver, because I believe that the ultimate goal of relationships, of marriage, is to bring both individuals, or is to create balance and harmony, and as scripture would say, holiness to both individuals. So a spender with a saver is totally okay. However, what must happen is you must learn to communicate. Here it is, a word that we don't like to talk about, expectations in relationships. And when we don't have agreed upon expectations concerning finances, then we will have chaos or division. And anytime you have division, which is two visions, then you cannot walk together. So What I'm saying is, in this area, what we've got to begin to do is we've got to begin to have some serious conversations about expectations. Well, what kind of expectations? Thank you. I'm glad you asked. The first area of expectations that you need to discuss in your relationships is to define needs versus wants. I recently did a class a couple of weeks ago, and one of the questions that I was asked was, how do we know in my home, in my marriage, in my relationship, what a need versus a want is? And my answer to that question is, you have to determine that for your relationship. Now, I do, Dave Ramsey does, anybody who does financial planning, financial coaching will tell you needs versus wants, but I dare not, as a man, for example, tell my spouse how often she should or should not get her hair done. For me, being a bald man who shaves his own head most of the time, going and getting my hair done is not a need. However, as a woman who has certain things that she has to do and has to spend a whole lot more time, getting their hair done, going to a salon might be a need for her. So you have to sit down and again, talk about the expectations, talk about what needs you have in your relationship versus what are the wants are in your relationships. And once you agree upon those, then you can move forward in planning your budget, planning your spending habits, planning your saving habits, and things like that. The second thing you need to discuss is you need to discuss systems. You need to discuss systems. What do I mean by systems? I mean, how do you pay your bills? How do you save? Some people do it automatically. Some people do through envelope systems. Some people don't do it at all. But what system do you have in place now, or do you not have a system in place now that you use to manage your financial portfolio? And understanding what you both do is beneficial, because if one person, typically the saver, is more disciplined and more strict and has a system that works for them, then you might want to go with that. And you as the spender, typically, not all, might want to relinquish that part of the finances to that person in the relationship. Again, this is going to vary by relationship, but these are the types of expectations and conversations that need to be had before, preferably before you enter into marriage. But if you're in marriage, then this is definitely a conversation that needs to happen on a regular basis. What's the third thing that needs to be discussed? So we talked about needs versus wants. The second thing we talked about is whether you have a system or not, and who is going to be in charge of the system. The third thing we need to talk about that needs to be talked about is comforts and discomforts. And this one might hurt your feelings, but there are people, again, typically savers. Well, not necessarily, I won't say that. There are people in relationships who need certain things in order to be comfortable. I'll give you a personal example. When my accounts get below a certain dollar amount, I feel a ton of discomfort. And there are people who are like that when they see that their balances get to a certain amount, when that they can't handle being an entrepreneur, because being an entrepreneur has so much volatility. There's not always a consistent paycheck. There are certain people who need to have X amount of money in savings, or there are certain, so there are all these different types of things that make us feel comfortable. And there are certain things that make us feel uncomfortable, and we need to be able to articulate those in our relationship so our partner knows what makes us comfortable and what makes us uncomfortable. Because when we are uncomfortable in our money, it tends to bleed into everything else. We don't communicate well when we're uncomfortable. We typically communicate from a place of high anxiety. We typically communicate, or some of us shut all the way down when we're uncomfortable. We typically don't want to be as intimate when we are when we are uncomfortable, or when there's discomfort in our finances. We typically don't want to be intimate when there are certain levels of discomfort. As a man, again, some of us like to withdraw from withdraw from intimacy or whatever it is when we are uncomfortable. And so you need to be able to discuss what makes you comfortable and what brings you discomfort in your relationship. Now, I'm going to say this too. If you are with someone who is a dreamer, is what I call them. If you are with someone who is with a dreamer, you have to understand that some dreamers, some entrepreneurs, some people who have that personality, we learn to get uncomfortable. We learn to get comfortable in uncomfortable situations. And so that's not necessarily good or bad, but again, understanding that we become, I'm not going to say immune, but we become less emotional when things aren't going the way that we want them to go financially, because we understand that that's a part of the entrepreneurial cycle for a period. But that needs to be communicated, and you need to understand, if you are a person who needs to see a steady paycheck, who needs to see certain things, that's just who that person is, and how to respond when they feel uncomfortable, even though you still feel comfortable. What's the next thing? So after you do all of that, then what do you do? After you communicate your needs and your wants, after you communicate your systems, after you communicate your comforts and discomforts, then you are in a place where you are able to put together a plan of action. Now, let me say, it has to be an agreed upon plan of action, not a plan of action that one person agrees on and the other person just acquiesces to so we can end the conversation. But it needs to be a really solid plan that both people agree on, that both people understand their role, that both people understand how they fit into the equation, that both people get their dreams and their aspirations met as best as possible. Then again, once you do that, then you have greatly diminished the chances that that confusion, that misunderstandings happen. And not to say that it's not going to happen, but when they do happen, now you can go back to having these conversations, communicating your comforts and discomforts, needs and your wants, systems and no systems. You can investigate those areas to see where you need to make adjustments. And when you get into the plan of action phase, that's when you got to start talking about the uncomfortable things, like what is your credit score? How much debt do you have? How much do you have saved in the bank? All of those things are going to come into play, which is why I said this is why you want to have this conversation before the relationship, before you get married. And if you're married, you want to have it as often as possible. We can get into systems and all these other things later, but I hope this helped you. I hope this gave you a start. I hope this helped you kick off the conversation, because this is Financial Literacy Month, and we need to be disciplined. We need to be focused. We need to be aware. We need to take advantage of the opportunities that we have right now, because every day that we're not investing, every day that we're just allowing our debt to build and build and build, is another day that we're going to have to work to get out of debt and to build where we want to build. So I hope this helps you. I hope this encourages you. I hope this gives you some information and a solid foundation to start from. And if you have any questions, as always, you can inbox me or you can email me at themoneymentor1@gmail.com. And lastly, definitely not least, if you still have not registered for the Level Up Conference, or have questions, go to our website at www.levelupchicago.com. I hope to see you in Chicago with me and my team August 9th, 10th, and 11th. We're going to have a great time, but we'll have a better time if you're there with us. I'll talk to you later. Have a good weekend.